And good afternoon. We are doing it live right here. Let's do some business here this afternoon in the 4 o'clock hour as we do weekdays at 4 right here on 790 KBC. Mottek On Money, live on the air, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com and the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, and all your favorite podcast platforms. Rough landing for the markets to wrap up the week on global concerns, focus on the Middle East. Stocks ending sharply lower today with the Dow seeing its biggest weekly loss in quite some time on investor anxiety over inflation and, of course, tensions in the Middle East. The Dow coming in for a closing loss of nearly 500 points today. The S&P 500 down 76, and the Nasdaq down 267 points. For the week, the Dow was down just about 2.5%. The S&P 500 down 1.6%, and the Nasdaq came in for a slight loss of 0.5% for the week. Dow seeing its biggest weekly percentage loss since March of last year. That's when we had that banking crisis and we saw a number of bank failures. The S&P 500 saw its worst week since October. Reports that Israel is now bracing for an imminent attack by Iran, sparking a scramble for safety across financial markets today, inspiring traders to dump stocks in favor of Treasury bonds, gold, and the U.S. dollar. The price of oil moving higher today, up 64 cents to $85.66 a barrel. The sell-off in the markets today initially driven by a report in today's Wall Street Journal that said Israel was bracing for an Iranian strike that could arrive as soon as today or tomorrow. It bore a strong resemblance to the market reaction we saw back on April 4th, which caused stocks to plunge in afternoon trading on a similar warning from Israel. Israel and the U.S. have been on high alert for possible Iranian military action. We did see bond yields move higher today. The VIX index, the so-called volatility index, also spiked today. Bond yields moving higher. We saw the yield in the 10-year note at 4.51%. Also, gold at or near record highs. Of course, oil prices also moving up. We'll take a closer look at all of that here shortly. Bond exchange-traded funds were getting a boost today as investors brace for potential escalation of tensions between Israel and Iran. Shares of the iShares 20-plus year Treasury bond ETF were up nearly 1% today. Another eye-popping report this week finds California spent $24 billion to tackle homelessness over the past 5 years, but did not consistently track whether that enormous public spending of public money actually improved the homeless situation. Take a look for yourself out there. Right now, an estimated 171,000 people are homeless here in California, which comes to about 30% of all of the homeless people in the United States, with Los Angeles the nation's leader in the number of homeless with about 75,000. That 75,000 number, by the way, larger than the population of most cities in the United States at this point. I'll talk about this and more with SOLEDAD URSUA, Venice Neighborhood Council board member. Also, we'll discuss the crime situation in that area as well. Los Angeles now considering a ban for criminal checks on housing applications. Have you heard about this? They're calling this one a so-called fair chance ordinance, which could fine landlords for discrimination based on a tenant's record if they're denied housing. I'll talk about that with Daniel YUKELSON, the executive director of the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. But first, on your money, the markets, and the economy, let's bring in Jim HAUSBERG, managing director at Hightower Advisors, the HAUSBERG Group in Beverly Hills. Jim, thank you very much for taking the call here with a lot of moving parts and big concerns about what's happening in the Middle East today. Give us your view of things here at the moment.
Well, you said it right in your opening, Frank. A lot of concerns out there, especially with Israel and Iran. I think it was a week or so ago where the talk came out that something was imminent and markets went down. You take a market that's been up as much as this one has, a little stretched, but still looks very strong. You throw this into the equation on a Friday, and not a lot of reasons to own stocks today. So the markets were down, whatever you said earlier, 1.5, 2 for the week, NASDAQ a half. These are small moves, Frank, in light of the fact of how much the market's moved up. And the excuse being thrown out is what's going on, what potentially could happen in Israel, which hopefully we don't have anything bad. My assumption is that things do quiet down there. You could see a rally at the beginning of next week. But again, this is all short-term stuff. But the other factor was the CPI came in a little hotter, even though way down from where it was last year. Remember, we hit a point of 9% inflation in 23. And if we run back to the fall, after the lows in October, the inflation numbers came out positive, or much lower, I should say, than expected. And then all the talk was 6 Fed rate cuts in 2024. Now that the inflation numbers don't seem to be as tame, now there's talk of maybe 2 cuts this year, down from 6, another reason why markets are selling off. And there's even those who think that inflation, if it does trade higher, we could see rate hikes later in the year. All that being said, the market seems to be okay with these higher rates. The economy continues to be strong. Labor demand is strong. I was reading in the LA Times today that housing prices, Frank, hit a record high in spite of the fact that interest rates are much higher, up over 9% year to year. So it's been a pretty strong economy. It's been a very good market, but there's always room for consolidation and corrections, and I think that's what we're going through right now.
On there live with Jim HAUSBERG, and you're right, inflation obviously had taken the spotlight for most of this week on that higher than expected consumer price index, and then a slightly less than expected producer price index, the inflation reading at the wholesale level. But all of this information has now kind of changed the predictions on what the Fed's next move will be and when and if they will be lowering rates. What's your expectation here on where rates go from here with those bond yields, the yield on the 10-year note, for example, here at 4.53%, the one that impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates ticking higher this week?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to go with the consensus because I don't know more than anybody else that there will be a couple of cuts. If inflation continues to run in this 3.5 range, and the Fed funds are at this 5.25 range, there's room for them for the Fed to cut. So we'll stay tuned on that. But obviously, they're going to look at the data and make decisions based on that. But it's it's a very tough call. And the inflation data, you're seeing higher oil prices due to what's going on in the Middle East. You're seeing, gold prices run up on fear as well. Sometimes gold is a risk-on trade. When people are feeling good about the economy, they want to own gold. Other times when there's fear out there, they want to own gold. So that's always a tough one to call and has not been a great long-term investment, although this year it's up strongly, as is oil. Bitcoin also has done well, although it was down 5% today. Yesterday, the VIX was down 4.5%. We had a pretty good rally led by Apple. And we go one day later, the VIX is up, 5 or 6%. So the volatility is going to be here and stay for a while, Frank. But we'll see with rates. The market's been able to handle it, but I don't think they're going higher.
Right. So certainly upward pressure on inflation at this point, especially at the gas pump. We've seen about a 40-cent spike over the last month here at the pump prices here in the Los Angeles area, and price of oil hovering at or near its high for the year. And if you saw the write-ups on whether if Iran attacks Israel, of course, then a tremendous spike in oil is expected here. What has this inflation genie been tamed in your view? Obviously, the Fed trying to thread the needle here on all this, but looks like there's a lot of upward pressure given a lot of unknowns out there.
Yeah, Frank, there's an area of investing called known as global macro, where you're just looking at interest rates, you're looking at commodity prices, you're looking at the dollar. And when that becomes the main topic of conversation in markets, it's very tough to focus on individual companies, let alone sectors. So you end up with a situation where people are so focused on this bigger picture stuff that it is very difficult to feel good about individual stocks and or sectors. And that's what I think is going on right now in the market. And so to look at that stuff makes it very difficult to take your eye off the ball, how well NVIDIA is doing, how well other chip companies are doing, how well the industrials are doing. It's taken second fiddle to the global macro picture, and we have to just ride through it.
Absolutely. Speaking of NVIDIA, the Magnificent One down about $24 today at $881 and change. And Apple, as you mentioned, had a winning week. In fact, the biggest week we've seen for Apple. In fact, it was the biggest gain for Apple, since November, I believe. So has Apple bottomed? We asked that question earlier in the week, and here we are with good results for Apple.
Yeah, I think Apple what their announcement was is that their Mac line of computers are now are going to be, the new ones coming out are all going to have the AI chips, and I forget it's G4, G5, whatever it's known as. And I don't know if it's chips that they're making or it's NVIDIA's chips or others, but that's going to lead to, I think, big sales for them, and that's why I think you got the bounce. And even with NASDAQ down as much as it was today, and the S&P down, Apple's up. You just don't see that. It's probably put in a bottom. I can't say if it's going to run. But when you generate the type of cash flow that Apple generates, to me, it's always a buy. It got a little ahead of itself, maybe with the run up to like the mid 190s, like a lot of other technology sector companies. But to me, it's the one to own, incredibly well managed, well diversified, making money in so many different areas. And, I think on weakness, that stock is always a buy. So we'll see where it trades with the rest of the market.
Yep, Apple, the Dow's biggest winner this week for the first time since last November. That's the headline today. And, of course, the earnings, the bank earnings coming out today as well. Let's talk about that for a moment. Any big news out of what you saw there?
Well, I think it was a little weaker in some areas. I didn't really get a chance to jump into it. I think credit card related issues, but like JP Morgan and B of A, a couple of the other big ones have had huge moves this year. The financials have been very, very strong in light of the fact that rates are higher, but they make more money. When rates are higher, they can lend money out at a higher rate. So I think they're in pretty good shape. But again, the moves have been big. And, you get any excuse to sell them, and that's what's going to happen. And one day doesn't make the market. So they were down today, but I wouldn't be overly concerned. I wouldn't be overly concerned with the overall market either, unless we get this global macro event in the Middle East that turns into a much, scarier picture. And if oil supplies are blocked, could lead to higher oil prices. We've seen that happen before. But hopefully cooler heads prevail, and we continue to do well in the markets and less focus on the global macro. Very hard to focus on the market when the global macro is the headlines every day.
All right. And gold making news again, up for the 17th. It's 17th record high today. As of today, it's soared another $42 to $2,414 an ounce. And that is pretty big news. Silver has also been along for the ride, now up nearly $1 today, by the way, at $29.18 an ounce. Silver's actually outpaced the strength of gold's gains so far this year. So what about the precious metals here, Jim?
Well, I think gold is silver's up 20%. Gold, again, I don't have today's numbers exactly, 16, obviously bigger. But, when you look over the past several years, the equity market's done much better, and I think that's what's going to continue to happen. You have to look at the NASDAQ, which was down, 0.5% this week. It's up 37% in the last 12 months, 9.5%, maybe 9% year to date. You look at the S&P, up 27% over the last 12 months. These are big moves over 12-month periods of time. So you got to expect some sort of a pullback. I'm not a real gold bug. I do see that it's trading higher. I think it's, people are buying it because of fear of the things we've discussed on this call. And will probably come down if things, like I said, cooler heads prevail. Hopefully that's the case. I think we all wish for that. But it's momentum driven, and that's where the momentum is. And it's, coming out of some other areas. But again, seeing Apple up in a down market today was pretty unusual. And I think the move yesterday was about 4.5%. And on a stock of that size, that's a gigantic move. So,
absolutely,
we'll see. And European, by the way, stocks doing much better. All through Europe, the stocks are up. And I got to tell you, China is looking interesting to me. It looks like maybe it's put in a bottom. I was reading about Macau today, the gaming area. The numbers are up. They said that the air quality was down, meaning more factories are operating possibly. So I think emerging markets are interesting, and China could be one. But you can buy EEM, which is the ETF that covers a lot of the emerging markets if one wants to venture there. And Europe as well is doing pretty well. So again, I'm still bullish on the markets. Corrections, pullbacks, consolidations are part of the game. They always have been. You look at where the markets have been over the past 10, 20 years, it's been a pretty good ride, Frank, and I think it's going to continue.
Wild moves, of course, as usual, pretty much in the crypto world, with Bitcoin now just below 67,000. It popped above 70K earlier this week. I know you keep an eye on that, too. What are your thoughts about crypto? And I'm sure you get asked about it a lot since it did. Bitcoin hit a record high this year.
No, I stay away. I mean, we had enough volatility in stocks, Frank. That you can't predict. Down 5% today. I think it's got support around 60,000. It could blow through that if liquidity dries up. But that's really the momentum trade that we've seen over the past couple of years. People buy it when it's going up and they sell it when it's going down. So you got me. I keep saying the same thing. I'm not an investor in it for any size. But, the more Bitcoin is used, the more value it brings to the table. And that's the same with the other, cryptocurrencies. The more these things are used, the more value they have. But some people think they're not used for great causes, black market stuff and money laundering. But I don't know enough about it to say that's the reason for its movement. But, it's certainly a part of our world today. And they've got ETFs now that you can invest in them, and that gave it, some more credibility. So, if you want to play around, keep a small piece. And if you get trading opportunities, I'd probably take advantage of them.
All right. And at this point, Jim, any specific places where you are putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Yeah, well, I've been talking about bonds for a while. I just like the fact that we can buy bonds at 5% in treasuries for short term. You go back 2 years ago, that was paying half of 1%. So today you're getting 5%. I think other fixed income areas, high yield, 8 to 9% looks attractive to me. And, some other type of bond funds that can go anywhere. I wouldn't just, stay with, short, treasuries 3 to 4 years out. I don't think you really get paid enough there. But if rates do come down, you'll make money in a lot of that stuff. So I like the short-term treasuries. I like longer-term stuff in high yield. As far as equities go, I'll say the same thing. The highest quality companies you can buy always make the most sense to me. Companies that are increasing their dividends in the 15 to 20% rate per year are the most attractive. Microsoft comes to mind there. It's not that I'm looking for the highest yielding dividend-paying stocks, but I would focus on the companies that are growing their dividends, increasing their cash flow, and returning cash to shareholders. That, to me, is the most attractive part of the equity market for long-term investors.
Terrific, Jim. Well, thanks for stepping up to the plate here to wrap up the week, and we'll continue to pay attention to what's happening this weekend and hopefully connect with you again next week. Jim HAUSBERG, Managing Director at Hightower Advisors, the HAUSBERG Group in Beverly Hills. Jim, thank you very much for joining us live here this afternoon.
My pleasure, Frank. You can always reach out to me on the down days.
Yes, and indeed we did, and you handled it. So thank you very much, Jim, and have a great weekend.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me. Right.
Thank you. Right out to the freeways now, 790 KABC. Friends, if you're hurt in an accident, you need an experienced advocate, and Clark Fielding and his team of sharks at Fielding Law are on standby, ready to dive into your case. My friend Clark the Shark is fearless for justice and your go-to attorney when injured in an accident that wasn't your fault. Whether it's a car accident, slip, trip, fall, or any kind of personal injury, Fielding Law is here to make sure you get the care, attention, and compensation you deserve. Fielding Law can assess the circumstances of the case, negotiate tenaciously with the insurance companies, and, if necessary, file a lawsuit and litigate to seek fair compensation on behalf of you, the injured party. An injury is a major disruption in your life. Medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, property damage, and other losses incurred as a result of the injury are all part of the damages. Don't try and handle the process alone. You need an expert in the process. The team at Fielding Law are the ones to trust. Put Clark Fielding's number in your phone under the word accident. That number is 833-88-SHARK, 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KABC. Rough landing to wrap up the week. The Dow down 476 points. It settled at 37,983. The S&P 500 down 76 at 5,123. And the NASDAQ sliding 267 to settle at 16,175. The yield in the 10-year note now at 4.53%. Apple, one of the star performers this week, in fact, up today in a down market, up $1.51 at 176.55. Apple was the leading gainer for the Dow Jones Industrial Average this week for the first time since November. NVIDIA shares pulling back more than $24 to $881 and change. Meta down 11 at 511 and change. Amazon down nearly 3 at 186.13. Microsoft down 603 to 421 and change. Tesla down 355 at 171.05, and Google down nearly $2 at 157.73. I think that covers all of the so-called Magnificent Seven stocks. Gold on a roll. Gold up again today, 17th record high, up $42 to $2,414 an ounce. Silver now above $29 an ounce. Taking a look at the cryptos now, we see Bitcoin bouncing all over the place right now, about $60 at $66,935. Ethereum down 13 at $3,212, and Doge at 17 cents. And now the latest news for you here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KABC. Breaking news, a transient has been arrested for attacking two women along the Venice canals. Last weekend, the police have announced the arrest of 29-year-old Anthony Jones for the assault of the two women. The announcement coming today, announced by the police, as well as a city council member who represents that area. That's Tracy Park. She very outspoken about what happened, thanking police for apprehending the suspect and expressing frustration with what she described as a decline in basic safety here in Los Angeles. In fact, she blasted policy, she says, have allowed dangerous people to roam the streets. And quoting her, she said, "I'm sick and tired of living in the middle of a failed social experiment." Another eye-popping report this week finds California spent $24 billion to tackle homelessness over the past 5 years, but did not consistently track whether the enormous spending of public money actually improved the homeless situation. If anything, it's gotten worse. Right now, an estimated 171,000 people are homeless here in California, which comes to about 30% of all the homeless people in the United States, with Los Angeles the nation's leader in the number of homeless with about 75,000. That number, as we frequently have reminded you, is larger than the population of most cities in the United States. Joining us live now is SOLEDAD URSUA, Venice Neighborhood Council Board member. Thank you very much for taking the call, and give us your reaction to this latest news today.
Hi, good evening. And, I'm very, happy that the suspect was apprehended. These assaults on women were just horrendous. And you see a lot of people who say that they're outraged. But as long as you allow the homeless to live in vans and RVs and on our streets, this will continue to happen. And let me tell you, the community is very upset by this. No one feels safe walking around at night. It's been several days since this homeless person was apprehended. We hear in San Diego, that's where he was caught. So you see that they're able to move around freely, and it's scary. No woman feels safe walking around in Los Angeles anymore, and it's all by failed policy.
And you yourself shared with us, you've been confronted many times by homeless, including those in the RVs there, right?
Yeah, well, I live basically next door to our bridge shelter, which is a 154-bed. It's non-sober. There are no regulations. What they tell us is that it's the responsibility of the offender to self-identify at check-in. So if you are a rapist, it's your responsibility to let the program officers know when you're checked in. So we have no idea who is living on our streets or even in our bridge housing. At one point, we had 2 sex offenders living in the bridge housing. So this is just sort of, this failed policy that's happening. And whenever these violent attacks occur, our elected officials throw their hands up and say that, this is outrageous and they won't stand for it. But they are not doing anything different, and they are going along with this failed policy.
Are we hearing anything different now from Council Member Park here, who expressed outrage about what happened and basically said that she's sick and tired of living in the middle of a failed social experiment? Is that how you feel as well?
Yes, I've been feeling this way for about 6 years. It's ironic. I just got my DMV registration, my annual renewal. I have to pay $265 to register my 2017 Kia Sportage. But guess what? I have RVs that have been parked near my house since March of 2020. Many of them they have out-of-state license plates, they don't have tags, some don't even have license plates. And that's because there's zero parking enforcement in the entire city of Los Angeles right now. We have still, used these COVID measures. We basically lapsed many of our regulations to allow the homeless to shelter in place during COVID. We all know that didn't work. And now we just have this huge mess on our hands where we don't even have the space to tow these RVs to. And you don't know who's living in them. Again, some of these people, maybe they're not violent, but maybe they are. And it's a 50-50 chance. And so these serious attacks on women will continue to happen as long as you do not enforce laws. So that's really what's happened. We do not enforce our laws anymore. And it's created complete anarchy.
Let me ask you about that report about how money is spent on the homeless situation here in California. According to one report, we saw California spend $24 billion to tackle homelessness over the past 5 years, but did not track whether that spending of public money actually improved the homeless situation. And just look out your door there now, you see what the situation is. What's your reaction to that report and your thoughts about how money is being spent on the homeless crisis there?
Well, this is something that, it's sort of a joke. We all know what the results of the audit was going to be. What this shows us that the homeless industrial complex is alive and thriving in California. It is now a multi-billion-dollar industry a year. And this is a problem that is not meant to be solved. It's just too lucrative for all of the contractors involved. You have the builders of permanent supportive housing, and then you have the service providers. They are making big money. Let's look at the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. That's just here. That's for LA County. They provide services for the county of LA. The CEO, Valicia Adams, she is making $430,000 a year. LAHSA has an annual budget of over $1 billion a year. So the audit that you brought up, the state audit, that's state funding. But what we see is that LA County is spending millions without any proof of evidence, and so is the city. So it's across the board. So this really is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry where no results are, being seen. It's just, sort of a money laundering scheme. And what we see is that these contractors are making such big money.
Quite heartbreaking. And of course, Venice had seen quite a renaissance up until recent years, right? Marina Del Rey used to be called, Venice used to be called Marina Del Rey adjacent. Now Marina Del Rey is Venice adjacent, right? We saw a tremendous rise in Venice, and of course it's one of the great tourist destinations here in the United States. It must be heartbreaking for you to see what's happening right there in your own backyard.
And what we've seen is it's turned from an international destination to a drug destination for drug tourism. You mentioned that California has 30% of all of the nation's homeless, but what you didn't mention was there's this HUD report that came out, and what they said was that of all of the unsheltered people experiencing homelessness, California has 50% of that. And that's because California is a very beautiful place to be homeless. You have these beaches. That's what we've seen here in Venice Beach. If you were going to be homeless, that's probably the beach to go to. I recently had two younger girls outside my house doing drugs for about 2 weeks. And so this is what we've attracted. We've attracted this kind of drug tourism where people know that they can come to Los Angeles because we do not enforce any of our laws. And they're also financially incentivized. Many people don't know this, but they do receive benefits. They receive disability benefits. They get meals. They get laundry. They get housing. So we've really financially incentivized, the nation's drug addicts to come here and live off the taxpayer. You may have noticed that the state of Oregon recently recriminalized drugs. They did an experiment decriminalizing drugs, and it's turned out very horribly. And so, I wonder if a lot of the homeless there that are drug addicts will slowly come down to California where it's still legal. And that's really due to Prop 47. We've decriminalized heroin, meth, fentanyl. And so that's really the problem that we have on our streets. It's not a housing crisis. It's a crisis of drug addiction and mental illness.
Thanks for speaking out about all of this, and your voice is being heard loud and clear here this afternoon. Soledad Ursua, by the Venice Neighborhood Council board member who keeps us well informed about what's happening in Venice. Thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Thank you.
Right out to the freeways we go now, 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KBC. Good afternoon. Did you hear about this? The LA City Council voting this week to consider prohibiting landlords from inquiring about prospective tenants' criminal history. Los Angeles now considering a ban for criminal checks on housing applications. They're calling this one a so-called fair chance ordinance, which could fine landlords for discriminating based on a tenant's criminal record. Joining us live now, Daniel YUKELSON, Executive Director of the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. Good afternoon to you, Daniel.
Hey, Frank. Thanks for having me on.
Good to have you with us. And your reaction to what the City Council did this week?
You know, Frank, sometimes I think to myself that our City Council must be run by dumb and dumber. What this is going to do is it's really going to put our residents in harm's way. You know, when you live in an apartment building, you share common walls, common floors, common ceilings, and you have constant interactions with the other people that are in your building. And our tenants could unsuspectingly be living next door to somebody who may have been a rapist, a child molester, somebody who's a drug dealer, and it's going to really create dangerous conditions at rental properties, and owners aren't going to be able to do anything about it. And unfortunately, people, may get hurt. Our residents may get hurt. Not the owners that are there every day, but, the residents could be in harm's way as a result of this. And it's going to be very, very problematic. The city is going to force these formerly incarcerated individuals on us without putting them through some type of supportive, intensive mental health or addiction treatment. And so we could be facing a lot of dangerous conditions at our buildings.
And then get sued for it, right? If you deny someone access to an apartment based on their criminal record. What is the situation now? Is that on an application? Have you ever been convicted of crimes, or what do people see now?
Yeah, we are allowed to ask on an application if somebody has had a past criminal history. And in addition to that, we do extensive background checks and searches for those exact kind of conditions. And if we see those, we could deny somebody's application. And, sure, there's definitely instances where, somebody may have been 18 and done something stupid 20 years ago. And, those are things that property owners should have a right to decide for themselves and how much risk they want to take on. But in these cases, we're going to be forced into a situation where we have to completely ignore the criminal background. And then if we're accused of denying somebody's application based on a criminal history, then we're forced into court, and and in the real world, when we get into court, we have to settle out of court, and we're going to end up having to pay out thousands of dollars. But on top of that, if one of our residents gets hurt, and we didn't tell them that they're living next to a child molester or a rapist, then we could get sued by our residents too. It's just a bad situation all around. And, the last thing I doubt any member of the city council is going to be willing to do is to allow somebody with a criminal background to live in one of their rental properties or live in with them in their house. They're just forcing it upon us. What's good for the goose is not good for the gander with the city council. And it's terrible what they want to do. It's just another risk that they're imposing upon people that own rental housing.
All right, looking at the vote here, 11-0. Looks like the council president and another council member recused themselves, and a couple members were absent during the vote. Is this going to go through?
Well, we're going to wait and see. It's going to the Housing Committee, which is run by a bunch of socialists. Nitya Raman, I like to call her Nikita because she's named after Khrushchev. And they're going to come up with an ordinance, and surely it'll go back to city council and likely get passed, given the makeup of the city council we have in Los Angeles today. But we shouldn't expect anything less out of the city council, because the number of former city council members have been hauled out of there in handcuffs before. And so that's the type of people that we are elected to this legislative body.
You kept us well informed during the pandemic days with all those pandemic considerations given to renters. Are we finally seeing an avalanche of evictions, which may be compounding the homeless situation out there right now?
Frank, the level of evictions are fairly the same as they were pre-COVID, and there has not been an avalanche. Property owners are licking their wounds today, trying to collect the past due rent, and they'll likely never collect it. And, as I've mentioned before, evictions are a very costly endeavor. They can cost up to $50,000 and take up to 8 months to fully adjudicate. and get a sheriff lockout. So they're really a last resort for any property owner. And what typically happens is property owners pay their tenants to leave. And they give bad actors their hard-earned money just to recover their unit as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible. And that's really the situation. And that's why a lot of rental property owners are getting out of the business today. And that's why we have housing shortages.
All right, and we got those inflation numbers out this week. It appears, at least according to the government, that rents are going up. Give us the real on what's happening here. Are rents going up or down here in the Los Angeles area?
Well, there's so few available apartments because there's much greater demand than there is actual supply. When a unit does come on the market, the rents do go up. We've had extreme inflation for the past 4 years. And so property owners need to increase their rents as much as possible. But for the most part, rental housing in the city of Los Angeles is under rent control, and those rent increases are capped at 4%. In fact, the city council wants to look at the way they calculate the amount of allowable rent increase and possibly lower it so it's a small percentage of what the consumer price index is, which is just going to kill property owners even further.
And your association has been fighting in court to recover some funds for landlords, right, during the time when tenants were not required to pay rent and so forth. How are those legal efforts going?
They're going slowly, but we still have 3 outstanding lawsuits, and we are looking at some other possible ways to sue the city to recover some money and secure money back for the damages that the city has caused us. And so we'll be announcing some new things in the near future, Frank.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that important update. That is Daniel YUKELSON, Executive Director of the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. Thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Thank you.
All right. We see the Dow down today, down 476 points to settle at 37,983. It'll be a nervous weekend with concerns focused on the Middle East, with Iran reportedly getting set to possibly strike U.S. or Israeli targets. Both the U.S. and Israel on high alert this weekend. The S&P 500 closed down 76 points, and the Nasdaq slid 267 points. The price of gold, meanwhile, shot to a record high today of $42 at $2,414 an ounce. Bitcoin at the moment up about 60 at 66,935. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang. I'll be back on Monday at 4 here on Mottek On Money, 790 KBC.
When you have sports mixed with your pop culture, along with humor and celebrity interviews, your earbuds are enjoying The Rich Eisen Show.
Kevin Millar, we're all paying rent in Ohtani's world, right?
And the Dodgers world. Game is healthy, game is good. And, I get asked a lot, is that good for baseball? Yeah, it's good for baseball. This is definitely the team to beat, because that should be your next correction, Richie, is this World Series a bust for the Dodgers and Dave Roberts?
Hell yeah. Search for The Rich Eisen Show on YouTube or wherever you listen.